Next, we have the Congressman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick, for his 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting, just in the last line of this question, I heard each one of you point back to supply chains, single sourcing, competitive markets. One of the problems with competition, which I'm all for capitalism and competition, but when you have a monopoly of several critical minerals that a foreign adversary, or at least a peer competitor, controls, what are we doing to solution for that? I mean, I don't see it, because right now we basically don't have a competitive market. We don't have a market. All we have is one country that controls all the resources for something that in the military probably supplies hundreds of thousands of parts that are literally the bottleneck, and it's probably one of the reasons that our fleet readiness for all aircraft is around 50%, which is atrocious. If we get into a war, we're done. And in space, which is something that obviously is the final frontier, if you will, what do we do to prevent that from being a choke point for us? They literally have us by the neck. What are we doing? What is a good solution? And I don't want to hear generalities of open market, because we don't have an open market. We have a monopolistic system. What can we do? And I have my own ideas, so hopefully we get somebody that gives me a good answer so I don't have to interject my own opinion. But I'll start with you, Mr. Chang.
To break your question into several smaller buckets. First off, while China has an advantageous position, it is not the sole producer of rare earths. Rare earth actually is a terrible misnomer. I think other more scientifically oriented folks prefer platinum group metals. There are other places that do produce them. There is, unfortunately, only one facility in the United States, and one of the reasons for this has been additional regulatory considerations, including environmental, that basically say, well, if you're going to mine that, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Suffice to say, the Chinese are not as enthusiastic about environmental regulations. The other aspect here is that whatever the rare earths are that you mine, you have to process them, and that is enormously polluting. And the Chinese have been more than happy to be the primary rare earth processor. So you may mine it in India, you may mine it in Canada, it still gets shipped to China for processing. I believe back around 2018, the United States broke ground for a domestic rare earth processing facility. To be honest, sir, I don't track that very closely. I don't know what the status of that is. But if you want to break the Chinese monopoly, it is not enough to open up more mines. It is absolutely essential to open additional non-China located processing facilities for rare earth minerals.
So, Mr. Chair, and I'll just go with that because I'm already halfway through my time, and that's how it works here. I will accentuate your point. We have 10 rare earth minerals we have no access to except for through China right now. Another 10 that we have limited access at best. Our regulatory burden and our inability to mine and process these rare earth minerals have put us not only at a strategic disadvantage, but actually in a worrisome position for any future conflict. We're not ready, simply not in a military sense or especially in a space sense. We think, and this is something I challenge both sides of the aisle to look at realistically. Just because we don't pollute when we get these minerals we're going to use anyways, doesn't mean that they aren't polluting 10 times worse than we would with the same minerals we're going to buy anyways and use anyways. So it's not conservationism. It's not a smaller blueprint of carbon emissions when you buy from China. It is just pretending like we're not polluting when we're actually polluting more. I just want to be very realistic about this. The future is America using the resources we have without the regulatory burden that makes it too expensive to do, because we're going to have access regardless. Or the alternative is don't be competitive. That's not going to happen. We're America. So I challenge both sides of the aisle to take a realistic look at we have to have access to these things, and we'll do it cleaner, better, and cheaper if we're not overly regulatory, putting over regulatory burdens on the American businesses. And so let's just take a really honest look at this scientifically, domestically, so we have a chance into the next century. And with that, I yield.
Representative from Georgia, Ms. McCormick, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I love that idea, Mr. Chang, on the way NASA goes out there and markets itself. I, too, would love, as a pilot and a physician, I'd like to get out into outer space myself. They market it quite well to me. Mr. Swope, you in your writings have talked about the fractured regulatory burden on our companies and how it kind of makes us non-competitive. Meanwhile, China has been basically getting rid of all the burdens. They can do that because they're kind of top-down driven. They don't have any balance in our government. What could we do that would put us in a more advantageous position so that we can actually be competitive in this future market? Rather than, for example, we have regulations on every single launch. If you change something, even for safety, to make it more safe, you have to go back and reapply. I'm just going to give you one example for that right to launch the next time. Ridiculous, because you did something safe and now you're getting punished for that by saying you're not safe enough to launch again. That's one example, but give me some examples that we could do here in Congress to make sure that we continue to be the most competitive market, encourage people to stay here, launch here, and excel here in the greatest nation in the world rather than become an afterthought in the space race.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I really think you nailed it there. One thing about the U.S. space ecosystem that's based on free market principles, to thrive, less regulation, less red tape, less bureaucracy is probably what we need to inject in that system to get the outcome that we want. 3 areas just to think about. And in some cases, folks in the administration and past administrations have looked to try to optimize this. So I'm not saying we're not doing it now, but definitely spectrum. How are spectrum rules aligned so that they encourage innovation and they don't encourage the status quo? When it comes to launch and reentry, I think I'd put a little focus on reentry. I look at one U.S. company that tried to do reentry the first time to a U.S. federal range. They had a lot of trouble, and since then they've been going to Australia. So I think right there, where is that? Is that a regulatory burden? Is that a coordination burden? Is that a prioritization burden that's not happening? I don't know, but we should look at that because there's a lot of growth probably for reentry. And then the third area I would just highlight is export controls, ITAR, issues where companies want to sell technology to other countries, allied governments, specifically thinking things on synthetic aperture radar. If you can't get it from a U.S. company, I'm going to go to a French company. And that's what happens because those rules are a barrier and a paperwork barrier. So I think in all those areas, we could improve the regulations that we have now. I don't think it's time for more red tape, more paperwork for space companies. So if I hear anything about adding a regulatory burden or rules, even if it's a light touch approach, that's still paperwork. I don't think the industry needs that.
Such a great point you just made. And first of all, I want to point out that every company that's trying to put our spaceships out there and retrieve them has a reputation that they exist on. If you fail, if you're unsafe, their business is done. There's nobody who wants to be more safe than those companies. They can regulate themselves probably better than we ever could and be competitive only when we get out of their way. And to your point, our ability to get in the way of selling our products to other countries only encourages us to be supplanted by China as the industry standard. And that's not just in space, by the way. That's in computer chips or anything else. We have to be very careful not to limit our ability. And by the way, we just had a dissemination bill last year that was overseen by the Secretary that we withdrew that boundary that the Biden administration put on us before and has made us competitive again in the market. But we lost shares during that time. We lost our industry standard. And so I just want to encourage people, and thank you so much for putting a very succinct outline of that, to not limit our ability to produce and disseminate and actually flourish in our nation as competitors. And the government's not the solution. We are the problem. Thank you for outlining that. Thank you. And with that, I yield.